This weekend of college wrestling did not disappoint. We had big matches, huge upsets. We got our first glimpse at each team's lineups, and history was made. But let's start out with the premier duel, Ohio State versus Virginia Tech. And Ohio State showed out, winning this duel 24-12 over Virginia Tech when they were pretty big underdogs going into the duel. And they won it with their depth. After all, Virginia Tech's 4 big dogs won their matches. And Virginia Tech won the 3 matches where both wrestlers were ranked in the top 10. But Ohio State had 2 preseason projected starters with Bryce Hepner at 165 and Gavin Hoffman at 184 out of the lineup. But their backups came in and won matches over ranked wrestlers. This is a sign of a complete team when your backups can jump into the lineup and win matches and help your team, push your team to get a big upset victory over a top 5 team like Virginia Tech. And the biggest upset in the duel came at 125 pounds when Brendan McCrone beat number 4 Eddie Ventresca. And when I was watching this match, I actually thought Eddie looked pretty good. He was getting to legs very quick. He hit that nice duck under, but then McCrone hooked his leg on the takedown, got 3 for the takedown and 4 back points, and at that point the match was basically over. And if it was just this match that Eddie Ventresca lost, I wouldn't be too worried, but he also got majored by Jack Maida. He got ridden hard, he gave up a couple takedowns, so it's starting to look like that NCAA tournament performance was more of an exception to the rule. But you know what they say, one bad weekend does not a wrestling season make. There's still a lot of wrestling to be done, and so Eddie can still turn it around and make something happen in the postseason. That was the biggest upset of the duel, but the biggest upset of the weekend was Ryan Crookham beating returning national champ and world champion Vito Arujau. So first, let's talk about Ryan. He also beat his teammate McGonigal, who was ranked 6th in the country, and to have beaten Vito, what a heck of a statement and introduction he had for himself into the world of college wrestling. And he's obviously a threat to make the podium now. Now, I'm not going to say a title threat yet, only because he didn't shoot on Vito. Now, that was probably a strategic choice. He probably went to the match thinking, I'm not going to take a shot, but I'd like to see him set up a shot and get to a leg attack before I'm ready to consider him as a title contender. But what is obvious is he is here to wrestle. He's here to win a title this year. So it's very exciting to see a freshman burst onto the scene and shake up these weight classes. He's going to wrestle Vito Arujau probably 2 or 3 more times this year. They are in the same conference, so we'll probably see them wrestle in the dual meet, at the conference tournament, and potentially deep into the NCAA championships in March. And on the Vito side of things, on one hand, the loss doesn't mean that much because it doesn't really matter where Vito is seated in the national tournament. If he's on a hot streak and if he's wrestling to his full potential, nobody's going to beat him. But on the other hand, he was on an incredible hot streak that's now over because Vito has been known to be a little up and down. So I'll be interested to see how Vito responds to this match, if he just goes on and dominates and starts a new hot streak, or if he comes back to earth and starts to wrestle a few more closer matches. And the other thing I'm going to be watching for is for you to hit that subscribe button. We're knee deep into wrestling season right now, so give me a chance, hit the subscribe button, and if at the end of the season you didn't like my content, you can always unsubscribe then. Another big result from this past weekend was Jacob Camacho beat Matt Ramos. Now, Matt Ramos started the season ranked number 1, and he should have started the season ranked number 1. He beat Spencer Lee, and he was the highest returning placer from the 23 national tournament. But I've said this on this channel before, he was a few seconds from losing to Jarrett Trombley in the round of 16 and never even making it to Spencer in the semifinals. So Matt Ramos was never a clear-cut number 1, gonna go undefeated, gonna win a national title kind of guy. We thought he could lose, and he has, to Marcus Blaze and now Jacob Camacho. But this is going to be par for course at 125 pounds. I wouldn't be that surprised to see all these 125 pounders lose throughout the year and just jockey for positions in those rankings. And come tournament time, it's not going to matter the seeding. Anybody seeded 1 through 10 probably has a fair shot to win the national championship. And Jacob Camacho, he was my preseason pick to win the NCAA tournament, and he certainly looks improved. His scrambling has certainly improved. One of his liabilities in the past, in my opinion, was his scrambling ability. He's very fast to legs and he can get to anyone's legs, but sometimes he didn't always finish super quickly, which allowed for a scramble and he'd give up the position and ultimately the takedown. But him and Matt Ramos were in a number of long scrambles in which Jacob Camacho either came out on top or didn't give up any points. So he's clearly a title threat and going to be very tough to beat throughout this season. And we saw our first glimpse at Iowa and Penn State's lineup. Now, Iowa wrestled at the Luther Open, and there really wasn't any other D1 competition in the tournament, so we didn't learn too much, but there was a notable result in that Anthony Ferrari entered as unrostered or unattached and ended up wrestling Victor Voinovich in the finals. And Anthony did win. He beat him 2-1, but it was kind of a boring match. He got 2 stall calls in the first period. He did get ridden for the entire second period, and then Victor Voinovich got an escape in the third period. So as far as winning a lineup spot, it probably doesn't mean that much because no one really scored any offensive points. But if Anthony Ferrari continues to enter in opens, I'm hoping he maybe enters the Midlands or the Southern Scuffle, we could then see how he'll match up against the rest of the field at 149 pounds to see if Iowa puts him in the lineup this year or just redshirts him second semester and get ready for next year. And while we're talking about Iowa, I have to mention Iowa's women's wrestling team, who made history having their first ever home duel in Carver Hawkeye Arena. And it looked pretty awesome. And the Hawkeyes destroyed the other 3 teams, which this means we need some other D1 schools, high-level D1 schools, to start women's teams so we can get some quality women's wrestling matches. I mean, could you imagine a Iowa versus Penn State women's match at 6 p.m. and then the men wrestle at 8 p.m.? 4 hours of high-quality wrestling versus 2 rivals and the 2 name brand schools in college wrestling. I think that would be pretty darn cool. And we saw Penn State for the first time this weekend, and they pretty much did what Penn State does. They rolled through everybody. But there's 2 things that stood out to me. First, Robbie Howard struggled. He lost 2 times to guys who are not national qualifiers. So I'm going to give this disclaimer again. 1 weekend does not make a whole season, but based off this performance, it looks like he may not be the solution to Penn State's 125-pound woes. Because as of right now, it doesn't look like he's going to make the podium, and he may struggle to qualify for the national tournament. And the second thing I noticed is all of Penn State's starters wrestled except for 2. One being 133-pounder Aaron Nagao, who, as we know, has been hurt, and the other is Alex Facundo at 165 pounds. But you know who did wrestle at 165 pounds? Mitchell Messenbrink. Which may not mean anything, but it's clear Mitchell is not taking an Olympic red shirt, and he doesn't have a traditional red shirt. So he is going to burn a year of eligibility this year. So that means the fight between Alex Facundo and Mitchell Messenbrink is on for that starting spot at 165 pounds. Check out this video for my preseason NCAA champ picks and subscribe.